Okay, Magnus, what I'm going to do is, the drill, just with a little sting, and then away we go. All ready.
All good.
Okay, bye.
Bye, Diddy. Top story of the moment on BizNews by some distance. Magnus Heystek's addressing the property slump in South Africa. You really do know the headlines, Magnus. The R1 trillion property collapse. Wow, those are big numbers. And when you talk about property or residential property being the middle class's biggest asset, it shows you how people's financial affairs have gone backwards.
Yes, good afternoon, Alec. Indeed, unfortunately, as I tweeted to people, I said, if you want to spoil your day, don't read my article on BizNews, because unfortunately it affects us all, and you can't deny it, you can't spin it. And I've been writing about this and talking about the slow destruction of property values for a very long time. But when you have a guy like Neil Gopal, who is the chairman of SAPOA, which is the South African Property Owners Association, representing 600 big commercial property owners countrywide, coming out and saying forcefully that this policy of catered developments, handing the keys to the vault to uneducated people, you're creating a disaster. And the disaster is that over the last 10 to 15 years, property rates and taxes have spiraled out of control, and we know that, but twice, even 3 times the inflation rate. And it is now destroying property values from the smallest property to the largest place like Sandton City. And people tend to avoid these things, but if you sit back and you realize if you put a value or the value destruction to every South African, whether it's listed, unlisted, private owner, or whatever, there's a lot of capital that's just evaporated, Alec. It's just gone. I mean, you and I have a bit of a background in the financial world. We can do some numbers, but I think the average man in the street doesn't realize what's happened. I mean, in his pension fund, there's 5% that's been downgraded to 1% in terms of relative value. If I can use Sandton City and Eastgate as an example, those buildings and many more of those kind were financed and by policyholders from Donny Gordon. And for decades, it was a superb investment. You would get your dividends every year. It will go up in value after inflation. And if you look at the destruction that took place in Sandton City, the building is still there, same building, same quality, but the value has been downwritten by 50%. It's very hard to believe.
Wow, 50%.
Well, you look at it's if you look at the statements from Liberty Life Property Fund, that's down 50%. And the decline happened even before the COVID. It happened 2017, 2018, and then just tumbled. So there's been a slight upturn, but it's still worth less, about 45% at the peak of the value. And that you take a property fund like Accelerate, which owns the Fourways Mall around my corner, which has declined by 90%. It's a penny stock, but the buildings are there. And part of the problem is, of course, the chaos as you leave the shopping center, the rates and taxes, the roads, the rubbish. And that's how these things impact on the valuation of a very large asset class in South Africa. And we now suddenly talk about Lichtenburg, but Lichtenburg's been coming for a long, long time. There are many other
the rural areas, even worse. Eh?
They've been coming for a long time. And Clover had to report to the public that they're closing because it's a listed company. But there are 10, 15 Clovers in Lichtenburg. And the same with Christiana, Wolmeranstad, Kimberley looks like it's not reported, so it doesn't happen. But if you drive around those towns, which I often do, you're just astonished at what's happening. And most of the provinces in South Africa, with the exception of the Western Cape, you've just had a humongous write-off of capital, and it's affecting people. I speak to many, many people. It's my job to talk to people. And I tell you, my property portfolio is costing me money. I have to pay rates and taxes. I have to pay maintenance, and the income has evaporated. So you're just becoming poorer. And hopefully it turns around, but we just don't see it yet.
Just to start off in the rural areas, often people who have built wealth would build shopping centers or build little office blocks or something in those rural towns. I presume a lot of those people would be your clients who are now looking at their retirement and so on. Are they able to offload those properties even at lower prices?
They're finding it harder and harder to offload. I mean, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, they could still get prices because you're quite right. What happens at the more affluent part of a small town, but if they have spare cash, they would perhaps, after they've bought the new tractors and the new Mercs, they would build a little shopping center, office block. And you see them in all the small towns. They all were built 30, 40 years ago. But today you find most of them are empty, or a lot of them are empty. And if they still occupied, the rates that people collect from these buildings are incredibly low, barely covering the cost of the rates and taxes, and there's no maintenance taking place. So when they do their audits at the end of the year, they write down these buildings by 20 to 30% year after year after year, and people will admit it to you. And that applies to whether it's Bombars or Potchefstroom. They will tell you my property values are down 50 to 60%, and it's a drag on my entire portfolio, and I cannot sell it. I can't give it away.
So that's in the investment side. But what about middle class South Africa, for most of whom their homes are their biggest investment?
Well, first of all,
you do address that in your article.
I do. I mean, the downward trend in the residential property market as a whole is well noted. Anybody will tell you property values have not risen in line with inflation for 13 years now. And in fact, in real terms, average homes have declined by something like 23, 24%. If you take the stats from FNB, the property barometer, the lower end of the market in the last year or two has done substantially better in terms of volumes, but not price increases. And the volumes have accelerated because of the lower interest rates that have been at 35-year lows. So people rushed out, gave up their rental properties, and started buying, which is fairly normal. But for the rest of the market, the middle income class or the upper class, whichever category you look at, property values where they take place, which is very interesting, have dropped by between 20 to 40%. I mean, Cape Town, for example, I track these things on using various methods, and I also own property in Cape Town. And I can tell you now that even on the Atlantic seaboard, where developers were selling new developments for up to 80,000 Rand a square meter, those prices have come down to 50, maybe 40, and they are burning. And I see daily adverts, reduced price, 200,000 Rand discount. And these are new developments. So there's this glut of property on the market, which is going to take many, many years before it's worked through the system. So to answer your question, yes, your property is some people like to call it an investment. Others would say it's your largest debt that you ever take on. But it's been a bit of a mortal blow in many cases to people. I spoke to a colleague of mine this morning, and he owns several properties, and we started speaking about property. And he was saying that a lot of people's movements, for instance, retirement plans, have been scuppered by the fact that people 10, 20 years ago said, well, I'm going to sell my big mansion in Houghton or in Dainfern, and I'll move to the coast to buy a smaller place. Well, guess what? The smaller place at the coast is now cost more than the big mansion, because nobody wants to buy these big mansions anymore, because it comes along with the added maintenance and rates and taxes. And the rates and taxes issue is slowly destroying the fabric of South African society from the bottom upwards, if one takes a philosophical approach to this issue.
Rates and tax is interesting because that's the local authority or the metropole where the incompetence and the cadre deployment that you mentioned right at the outset has meant that the costs just continue to rise, whereas there's the place that you get the money from when you do need to raise revenue is your ratepayers. So what do ratepayers do in a case like that if you get this ever-increasing rise in costs and no real improvement in the facilities.
Well, you'll see over the last couple of years, several ratepayers associations have gone to court. I mean, you had down in Harry Smith, there have been legal battles for years. There have been legal battles in Kestel, and where they've taken over the water and sewage. That's going to increase because rates and payers have found that dealing with the councils is not given them any outcome or positive outcome. If you look at the statements by Clover, where they said that for 5 years they had negotiations with the municipality of Lichtenburg, and absolutely nothing happened. So the day that they pull out, remember, Clover is now an Israeli-controlled company. I mean, I think they just came to a point and said, cut and run. We can't carry on like this. Then suddenly the mayor was up in arms and doing interviews and saying, it's too soon, they should talk to us. And the guys turned around and said, we've been talking to you for 5 years. You don't respond to our calls. You don't respond to our emails. You just don't do anything. And, just to summarize it, like J.P. Landman, who's well known for his positive outlook on South Africa, he wrote a week ago on this issue, and I quoted in the article. He simply says it's a mess. And in South Africa, and he basically says, due to the way the constitution was drawn up, and you have independent councillors or Sunday, and as a result of cadre employment, people have been put into places where they control the finances across the country, and there's absolutely no control over them. You just look at the latest report by the Auditor General on the state of municipalities. It is just unbelievable, the looting and the theft that's what's been going on, and we're all paying the price. And the ANC will need to address this issue. It's almost a bigger issue than the whole Eskom issue, because if you quantify it, it's more than the 500 billion that Eskom owes. This is a much bigger number because it's destroying very large parts of our economy. Like, for instance, Peter Bruce, your erstwhile colleague, wrote in his column this week, he talks about an incapable state that even breaks the rusks. Now, the story is that a town like Molteno in the Cape, where the Omas rusks are manufactured, the things you dip in your tea every morning, Alec.
My favorite. Buttermilk, best in the world.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Yeah, we agree on something. But he even says
buttermilk.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So they're even thinking of closing down because the roads from Molteno to a highway close by is so bad that the trucks are shaking so badly that the rusks are breaking, and that's hence the headline, that even the rusks are breaking. So now you have the situation, Molteno, the largest employer, I beg your pardon, Oma is the largest employer in Molteno, they might pull the plug. And this is happening all over the country. And when the COVID virus hopefully is over quite soon, this is probably one of the biggest issues that Cyril Ramaphosa will have to address. How do you rein in those mayors and councillors who are absolutely just spending this money, other people's money, without any restraint or regard to what the outcomes will be?
Well, we've got an election coming up in October. Certainly Herman Mashaba says he's going to win a big chunk of the country. Most people look at him as though he's crazy. He's just talking in a vacuum. But as a rational thinking citizen, do we all just pack up from other parts of the country and move to the one area or the one province which is properly governed in the Western Cape?
Well, that's already been happening for a long time, and that is continuing to happen. And if you look at the FNB stats, they break down the reason for sales of property in a certain region. And selling to immigrate is still high, but selling to move to another part of the country is extremely high. I think it's 20-25%. If I look at my area where I'm living, 4 or 5 of my immediate neighbors have all left the last 4 or 5 years. And they've all gone to one place. They've all gone to the Western Cape. And, it's a major trend. So the Western Cape, to a large extent, is still protecting values. I mean, Baldevie and George and the Cape. But the rest of the country, it is quite a catastrophe for people, because that asset that they thought they had is gone. It has evaporated, and it costs them money. I refer in the article to a little piece of stand I bought unwisely 10 years ago, which has cost me 2 million rand over time. I cannot give it away, but I need to pay the rates and taxes every month or I get a lawyer's letter. Now, that is amplified across the country, in my view, at a much larger rate than we discuss.
So, what are your clients doing about this? And indeed, what are you advising them? Just to cut and run, or perhaps look at this as some opportunity? Because if prices are that low, at some point in time, you would hope that sanity would prevail in the governance.
Well, if you want to make an investment based on hope, then you do that. And you buy a property and you hope it'll turn around, and then it'll be a great investment over time. If the councils can be reined in with their spending, or government steps in and says no more, your costs will only increase in line with inflation, because the people paying those rates and taxes, their salaries and incomes have not kept pace with inflation. This must stop. So if you believe that, and I could be 100% wrong, but I wouldn't place too much faith in that kind of scenario evolving over the next couple of years. So, and then based on your question, what do I tell people? If you are overweight property, put some of them on the market and don't wait for the upturn as everybody seems to. Get some cash, get some liquidity into your portfolio, because what the COVID pandemic is illustrated, the fund managers love to call cash is trash. Well, let me tell you, Alec, the cash has been a fantastic investment for the last 5 years, beating most equity funds in South Africa, if not all of them. And it's immediately available to you. You've been getting 6 to 8% on your money, with no risk, with no additional friction costs. So cash is still very nice. I disagree with these fund managers who like to beat the drum of cash is trash. Just do the 5-year numbers. Cash has handsomely beaten the local equity market.
And to close off with another fund manager, our Thursday evening person who does what you do on a Wednesday evening for the BizNews Power Hour, Piet Viljoen, he wrote recently that you shouldn't be investing in residential property, or certainly the house that you live in. Are you aligned with that thinking?
Indeed, I am. I know that's Piet's view, and it's been his view for a long time. And I look at my own experience, where I made the same mistakes trying to build a property portfolio and become this fantastic landlord and collecting rental. Well, that has simply not happened. And that's why I started writing about this issue 5-6 years ago, where I saw my personal portfolio, my rents are going down, but my rates and taxes are rising. If that continues, it turns out to a disaster. And fortunately, I started selling. But my lovely, lovely German wife, who likes bricks and mortars, has got 2 or 3 little properties that she has. And every time I tell her, darling, sell, she says, no, but it's a good investment. I say, well, let's sit down and do the numbers. And then she sits back and she says, yeah, you're right. But she says, I can't sell it. I like my property.
Emotion.
Said,
Yeah,
it's emotion. Humans have this attachment to a property, no question about it. And then I said, look, if it's about emotion, I'm not going to win this battle. But if it's about rands and cents and returns and liquidity and diversification, it's simply not a good investment, especially in the scenario that I've just sketched, where things that you can't control, like your rates and taxes, is just running away. And Neil Gopal from Sapawa says that. He says you're crazy to buy property. And I think he's using this statements in the media to try and alert the government to this problem, which could become even greater problem. Those were his words, not mine.
Mooi so. Dankie meneer. That was lovely.
Thank
Lovely
you, Alec.
chatting to you. Thanks, man. So you're off the I wanted to focus particularly on this story because it's been well read, and rather than doing our normal talk about other things tonight, I'm going to run the full thing. It's nearly 20 minutes, so we'll run the full conversation tonight.
Thanks, Alec. Thanks as always. And you well, and Jeanette well.
Yeah, we back. We 100% now. I think day 15 or something. So I'm right through everything. And Jeanette still, she was a couple of days behind me, so she's still coughing a bit and still a bit weak, but no, she's through it. So COVID's not, it's, you know, it's a bad, I mustn't say that, because some
Yeah,
people,
yeah.
when, you know, people